I have a rendezvous with death. We'll preserve the last best hope of man on earth, or we'll sentence them to take the last step into 1,000 years of darkness.
No fear. No political correctness. No wokeism. You're listening to Underground USA.
There's been a lot of uneducated debate on the legitimacy of President Trump's Department of Government Efficiency, the effort headed by Elon Musk. As those who see their seats at the taxpayer-funded government feed trough threatened, panicking about having to do without, the idea that the new entity is illegitimate needs to be laid to rest. It is legitimate. Recently, 14 state attorneys general were denied their request for a temporary restraining order to obstruct Musk's DOGE efforts, claiming that eliminating waste and fraudulent spending in the many federal agencies and departments would cause harm to their states. Ironically, it was U.S. District Judge Tanya Chutkan, the same judge who presided over the criminal investigation into Trump's alleged efforts to overturn the results of the 2020 election, who ruled against them. As Fox News' Brianne Depich reported,
plaintiffs argued that the leadership role held by Musk, a private citizen, represents an unlawful delegation of executive power and threatened what they described as widespread disruption to employees working across various federal agencies and government contractors. There is no greater threat to democracy than the accumulation of state power in the hands of a single unelected individual, said the lawsuit, filed by New Mexico Attorney General Raul Torres. Attorneys general from Arizona, California, Connecticut, Hawaii, Maryland, Massachusetts, Michigan, Minnesota, Nevada, Oregon, Rhode Island, Vermont, and Washington also joined him in the request.
Chutkan was correct in denying the attorney generals their TRO, but not for the reasons she stated, which centered on proving irreparable harm. Instead, the denial, which should have been dismissed with prejudice, should have centered on the fact that DOGE exists as a repurposed department already codified by Congress. The DOGE effort under the Trump administration is indeed a repurposed version of an initiative initially established during the Obama administration. The Obama administration created the United States Digital Service, USDS, in 2014 to improve government technology and address issues like the healthcare.gov rollout. The Trump administration rebranded and expanded this effort into what is now known as the DOGE, which focuses on government efficiency, cutting waste, and modernizing federal technology. DOGE, like other government initiatives, has a legal basis for operating, with that basis rooted in executive authority and existing budgetary approval through discretionary spending. The President has the constitutional authority to issue executive orders to establish or direct the operations of initiatives such as those tasked to Musk through DOGE. Executive orders do not require congressional approval and can be used to set policy and or reorganize federal agencies or offices. Further, the Constitution grants the President broad executive authority to reorganize and manage the executive branch as deemed necessary for the efficient operation of the government. This includes creating, rebranding, or repurposing offices or initiatives like DOGE. Regarding funding sources, DOGE service falls under the Executive Office of the Presidential Budget, and its fiscal year 2025 budget is available for DOGE activities. This budget typically covers staff salaries, technology, and advisory initiatives. Further, agencies hosting DOGE teams can redirect portions of their discretionary funds, departmental expenditure limits or DELs, to support embedded personnel or system upgrades as suggested by the Framework for Efficiency Initiatives. Therefore, DOGE does not require new legislation for its operations. It operates under the existing legal framework that supported its predecessor, the the U.S. Digital Service, codified by executive actions and legislation pertaining to government efficiency and technology. For DOGE operations to be considered unconstitutional, several scenarios or arguments would have to be satisfied before judicial interference would be constitutionally appropriate. If DOGE were to execute functions explicitly reserved for Congress or the judiciary, like making laws or adjudicating disputes, it might be seen as an overreach, violating the separation of powers principle. However, as DOGE is narrowly tasked with seeking out waste, fraud, and spendthrift expenditures, neither of these lines in the sand has been crossed. If DOGE were to spend money that has not been appropriated by Congress, it could violate the Appropriations Clause of the U.S. Constitution, which states that no money shall be drawn from the Treasury but in consequence of appropriations made by law. As DOGE operates exclusively under the fiscal umbrella of discretionary spending, this red line has not been approached. If DOGE's actions led to the deprivation of rights without due process, like if it implemented policies or technology that affected individuals' constitutional rights without providing a fair hearing or legal recourse, this could be considered under the 5th or 14th Amendments. Since DOGE is tasked with ferreting out waste and fraud that exists as an abuse of taxpayer dollars, i.e. an abuse of power, no encroachment into federal employee rights can be recognized. As federal employees under the executive branch serve at the pleasure of the president, redundancy terminations and employment separations for an employee's lack of fidelity to presidential directives fall well within the president's purview. If DOGE were to engage in surveillance or data collection practices that infringed upon citizens' privacy without proper legal justification or oversight, this could be seen as violating the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches and seizures. Since DOGE is simply claiming the right to existing data, there is no surveillance or data collection, making this point moot. If DOGE's operations included censorship or content control in a way that infringed on free speech, this would be a significant constitutional concern. With DOGE being a transparency effort, this issue is also moot. Should DOGE implement policies or use technology in a discriminatory manner, this could be challenged under the Equal Protections Clause, suggesting that individuals are not being treated equally under the law based on race, religion, gender, or other protected classes. Again, because the DOGE effort is to root out waste, spendthrift monetary practices, and grift, the effort is not identity-driven, rendering this go-to favorite of the radical left nothing more than a hollow claim. And lastly, if the initiative were seen as an attempt by the executive branch to bypass legislative processes or create de facto laws or regulations without congressional approval, it could be argued that this was an unconstitutional expansion of executive power. Yet, because the DOGE effort is rooted in eliminating existing waste, fraud, and corruption, the actions that result are not legislative or regulatory. They are operational and fall squarely within the executive purview. For any of these scenarios to lead to a finding of unconstitutionality, DOGE would need to take specific actions or create specific policies that clearly violate constitutional principles. No argument can be levied to make any of these charges. Any legal challenge requires evidence that DOGE's actions go beyond the executive branch's constitutional authority or infringe upon individual constitutional rights. That threshold isn't even in the room. So yes, Virginia, there is a legal and constitutional basis for DOGE to both exist and operate, much to the chagrin of the deep state spendthrift swampeteers in Washington, D.C. and beyond. Carry on, Elon. You are providing an incredible service to your adopted country, and I, for one, am very thankful. Bunny, in the end, landing a man on Mars may prove easier for Musk than expunging corruption and fraud from the federal government. Who would have thought? When we return, our segment on America's Third Watch, broadcast nationally from our flagship station, WGUL, AM 930 and FM 93.7 in Tampa, Florida.
You're listening to Underground USA.
A free and independent media is the backbone of our great republic. So it's crucial to have media outlets that aren't influenced by big tech censorship or the leftist mainstream media complex. But that means supporting journalistic outlets that bring us the truth without spinning facts to push a narrative. For less than the cost of a cup of coffee once a month at Starbucks, you can support the free speech mission of undergroundusa.com, an independent, reader-supported, and sometimes irreverent podcast and publication that gives you the real story without the bias. Go to undergroundusa.com/UUSA. That's undergroundusa.com/UUSA to receive a 25% discount on an annual subscription, bringing every new podcast and article directly into your email inbox, circumventing the censors and fact-checkers. Remember, knowledge is power, and staying informed is one of the best ways to protect our republic. Go out there and seek the truth, my friends. Subscribe to undergroundusa.com today.
News, insight, passion. AM 930, The Answer.
You know, it is a good day, Frank, when Kash Patel gets confirmed, and then Sheldon Whitehouse and Adam Schiff have to deal with that at some point.
There was a meme on social media that I chuckled at that said, "Did you hear that? That's the collective staining of pants in Washington, D.C. because Kash Patel just got confirmed."
Wow.
And there's a lot of truth to that too. There's a lot of people who should worry about their status quo activities, and that needs to be definitive. It needs to be said over and over and over again. Kash Patel is not about retribution. Kash Patel is about saying you will be held accountable for your actions. You know, there's a lot of people I'm seeing on the left today, and even some people who are suffering from this cultural phenomenon that sees the left's activity in everything else. If corruption is the story of the day, they see corruption everywhere. That's not the case. You know, it's just not the case. Kash Patel, the reason people fear him is because the status quo has gotten so corrupt that the wrench that grinds the gears to correct it makes loud, agonizing sounds. Mm-hmm. And it's needed. It's needed. The deep state uniparty swamp in Washington is so corrupt, and USAID exposed that. And what's going to be exposed further when they start delving into Social Security deeper and Medicare and especially Medicaid, it's going to make people's heads explode. You need someone who's going to say, you did this? Well, you're going to be held accountable for it because, get this, it's against the law. Yeah.
And I think a big part of that too, Frank, is that they actually did it, whereas the lawfare against Donald Trump was, no pun intended, trumped up.
Yeah, and that's the difference. The left believes, and this is something that Victor Davis Hanson says, enunciates just very, very clearly. The left believes that because if they were in Donald Trump's position, this is what they would do. We'd go after all our political enemies because they tried to harm us, because retribution, when you have the power, that's what you must do. But that's not the case. It doesn't exist. It's a cultural Stockholm syndrome. Mm-hmm. They just truly believe that that's what Donald Trump is going to do. That's what Kash Patel is going to do. That's what RFK Jr. is going to do. That's what Tulsi Gabbard's going to do, because that's what they would do. But it's not. Tulsi and RFK and Kash Patel and Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. They're not going to do that. They're righting the ship. Now, will there be consequences for bad actions? There has to be. Otherwise, the bad actions keep happening.
Oh, yeah.
You know, the people who did crime, who abused their positions of public service to enrich themselves and to illegally further an agenda using taxpayer dollars, need to pay a very, very high price. And that means a lot of people going to jail. But they'll get the day in front of their in court, in front of a jury of their peers, to make their case to be adjudicated. They have to be indicted first.
Mm-hmm. As the ship is righted, as you're talking about, a lot of the stuff will naturally be uncovered. I mean, so it's not about retribution per se, but it's just about cleaning house, and then all of a sudden, whoa, look what we found here.
There was someone who popped up on social media yesterday who said, boy, you know, I can't believe that you're just all trusting with Elon Musk and what he's doing, because can't you see that he's just doing this for himself, to further himself? He's going after things that benefit him in his private sector with his companies. And my head cocked like a dog hearing a high whistle. Can you be serious? So his exposing trillions of dollars in waste and fraud using taxpayer dollars is somehow benefiting him in the private sector.
Right. Well, sure, it's a spurious argument, but the thing is, it sounds like something. You know,
Yeah.
it's a sentence and put together and everything, but it's completely off base. But
that's what I meant by a cultural Stockholm syndrome. Our society is suffering a cultural Stockholm syndrome because for so long, we have been told this is what government is.
Mm-hmm.
This is what it's just the way it goes in Washington. It's just the way government is. That we've not only come to believe it, we've come to sympathize with it, and we've got to wake up.
Well, you know, yeah, I saw this as we were getting ready to come back from the break here. I just thought this is the funniest thing ever. Are they really going to put their hopes and dreams into Mayor Pete, Frank?
This is a woke editor over at AP saying we've got to get some kind of story about the left in there.
Right.
Balanced means we have to get something. So what do they got going over there? And somebody at the conference table in the Daily Scrub going, well, Pete Buttigieg wants to be important again. So let's float the idea that he wants to be senator and president of the United States. Okay, I can put 300 words together on that. maybe MSNBC and CNN will pick it up. You know, that's how those things work. So Pete Buttigieg, no, his 15 minutes of fame is over. And if by some bizarre turn of events he actually does, he'll be eliminated faster than Kamala Harris was when she ran for president.
Yeah.
The first time.
Yeah, exactly right. I think you're right on the money with that, Frank. And of course, there's obviously a lot going on with the Russia-Ukraine negotiations at this point, the whole situation there. What do you make of all this in terms of how the tone has changed? Kind of back and forth, it seems like even. We now have got Zelensky trying to say some very nice things after meeting with the envoy, General Kellogg.
Yeah, I'm sure General Kellogg pulled out a checkbook and clapped it shut so it made a very large sound and say, "Did you hear that? That's what your attitude is doing. Mm-hmm. So just keep it up, funny boy." And I say that because Zelensky used to be some sort of comedian over there.
Right.
You know, you don't go to the person who's got the big checkbook and start, for lack of a better term, and pardon my French, and start trying to bitch slap him around the stage. You just don't do it. And this arrogant attitude about what he will and won't accept, because he doesn't have an authoritative seat at the table. Trump didn't say he was going to talk to Vladimir Putin and negotiate a settlement so that Zelensky could be there flipping Putin off over his shoulder. He said he wanted to talk to Putin about ending the war.
Right.
So there's no reason Zelensky had to be involved in that. Just like there's no reason for Putin to be involved in talks between the U.S. and Vladimir Zelensky. We have a right to talk to whoever the hell we want to, whenever we want to, about anything we want to. And for someone who's been over here begging for hundreds of billions of dollars to come up with an attitude about what we will and won't do, you better check that at the door, son, because it's not being received well.
Well, exactly right. And of course, there's been a lot of controversy about what Trump has talked about Zelensky. But I like the way that Mark Levin put it, talking about, of course, the Russians are really the ones that have really started up this thing about, well, there haven't been any elections for Zelensky since the war began. But that's part of their constitution, evidently. But Mark Levin put it very well when he said there is absolutely no free elections for Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, well, he suspended. It's in this constitution, but there's supposed to be an immediate action that triggers the legislature over there to talk about when the next elections will come. Mm-hmm. And that hasn't taken place. So when you've got these things written in, and well, we're at war, so we're gonna have to just completely suspend everything that's normal because we're a democracy. Does that make any sense? I mean, we kind of fell for it a little bit here in the United States back in World War II when we just have to elect Franklin Delano Roosevelt to a fourth term. Well, we're in the middle of a war. That wasn't really why they foisted that canard on the nation. It was about the economics of everything that was happening and his pursuit of a more socialized government here in the United States with the New Deal. Do some reading on it if you think I'm being too jadedly right. Most of the New Deal is rooted in a more socialist United States. So, you got to play by the rules that are written. Now, granted, we didn't have an amendment back then that said 2-term limit for president of the United States. We do now. We learned our lesson. Zelensky's, their constitution has things that must be done, whether they're at war or not at war. And if he believes that he's the only person that can navigate this war, that's some ego he's got going there.
Yeah, no, indeed. And, of course, one of the things that's concerning me, Frank, is this notion that, we've seen this conventional war play out over the last 3 years or so. I often wonder, well, how much is enough to actually go win the war? But, of course, if you do really pour it on to the point where you're really going to beat back the Russian army or whatever suffices to be the Russian army these days, Vladimir Putin has nuclear weapons. I mean, that has to be part of the equation.
Well, that's why you have to have the adults in the room at the table. You have to have the adults at the room at the table here. Mm-hmm. You have to think everything through to the logical conclusion with many different models of how it could go. If you're backing Putin into a corner and he's got this in his arsenal, they've already sent drones over to screw with Chernobyl. So he's not really shy about jacking with nuclear stuff. Mm-hmm. So it has to be considered. And if Vladimir Zelensky is and don't get me wrong, I'm not a fan of Vladimir Putin. If I could wave a magic wand, Ukraine would be sovereign and they wouldn't be threatened by Russia. And they wouldn't be a cog in the ambitions of Vladimir Putin to put the band back together.
Right.
But we live in a world that needs everybody to be realist. And right now, when you look at the fighting age and the number of fighting age men in Ukraine, they've been much more depleted than Russia has. So in a game of attrition, they lose.
Right.
Unless Zelensky can sucker NATO into it or other countries to come to his aid. And that's what he's been doing with this NATO thing. Now, I've got a friend who used to be someone who counseled the EU people over there, who is completely on the other side of the coin that I'm on. He believes Russia should be vanquished and the Russian government should be crushed from the face of the earth. Well, that's one scenario to consider, but I don't find it to be a realistic scenario. And the fact that Zelensky believes that he'll be able to hold out and win this war in a meaningful way, I don't see that being realistic either. Mm-hmm. So let's have an accounting of our money. Something else that hasn't happened, Mr. Zelensky.
Well, again, as we go through all these major issues that are happening literally all around us, can you believe, Frank, that it's just been about a month since Donald Trump took office, but yet the world is being reshaped. The federal government certainly is being reshaped. The sky's the limit here. The chainsaw of bureaucracy was bestowed upon Elon Musk at CPAC.
Yeah, by the president of Argentina, who is
Yes.
who is having some problems of his own down in his country with people who don't like the fact that there's pain that comes with change for the better. I don't think that his presidency is in any trouble down there because the economy is starting to turn the corner. The budget is balanced and the currency is starting to gain value down there. He's doing almost exactly what Donald Trump is doing up here. He doesn't have an Elon Musk, but not everybody can have one of those. But that's something we have to understand going forward, that there's going to be some pain. I get a kick out of the people who are griping about the price of eggs and how come there aren't immediate jobs and why is inflation not coming down like rocks falling down a mountainside. Those people still don't get that 4 years of devastation have consequences that take some time to rectify. This petulant child instant gratification thing has to come to a screeching halt. Mm-hmm. We've lived so high on the hog for so long just because our government decided to print money and put us into debt beyond generations rectification that there's got to be a little bit of pain. But when you measure it to the pain that other countries around the world have to face every day, we should consider ourselves lucky. So as they say, as Satchel Paige said, you don't look back, you look forward. And you keep looking forward, because if we keep implementing these reformative agenda items that Donald Trump has brought to our country in his presidency this time around, we will be better off for it down the line. I prefer to listen to the Treasury Secretary when he's talking about, we really do want to get to a point where we can abolish the IRS. You show me one American who's going to protest against that reprobate organization getting shut down and not having to pay an income tax because they've figured out a better way to fund the U.S. government where everybody pays. And, oh, my God, they just might actually put them on an annual budget.
Right. Well, Frank, of course, the ability to levy taxes is a big part of, obviously, of what Congress can do. But, we're talking about taking that away. And I agree with you. I think the American people would say, OK, good, let's do something different. But it would be a very, very difficult thing to do. Talk about wailing and gnashing of teeth. That we'd never see anything like that before.
Oh, yeah. The deep state has to be sufficiently hobbled before that could ever become a reality. And this is another reason why understanding U.S. history and world history is so critically important. We didn't always have the income tax. That's a 20th century thing. we were actually gleaning enough money to actually fund the federal government at its level. And I get that we've gotten much bigger since then. But we did it before the advent of the income tax through tariffs. Dirty word, tariffs. When you're basing it off something that is other than income tax, like tariffs or a consumption tax, which I support in a very rigid form, so that it can't be, percentages can't just be raised because Lizzie Warren's losing at the track this month. Everybody pays into the system. The people who vacation here, the people who do business here, the people who glean profits from doing business here, they all pay into the system. Right now, it's just the taxpayers that pay into the system for the most part. What Donald Trump is trying to do is flip that, so that if there has to be a continuation of the income tax, it's something that doesn't grossly affect families at every level, whether they're the uber rich, which the left tries to demonize 100% of the time, even though most of the people doing the demonizing and behind the microphones in the House and the Senate are the uber rich, all the way down to the regular worker. Mm-hmm. So we've got to get over that cultural Stockholm syndrome that we're suffering because we've been abused for over 100 years. Right. Especially as far as taxes are concerned. And we have to keep looking forward and fighting to make sure that we kill. And boy, if I get emails about using that word too freaking bad, suck it up. We have to kill the deep state. We do. They have done nothing but abuse us for the entire time that they've gotten their apparatus humming along in Washington, D.C. And quite frankly, if that means whole corporations have to go by the wayside, and I know I'm going to have to wear Kevlar after this, then so be it.
Well, of course, the whole idea of taxation, a lot of that has to do with control, especially when you want to change something. Well, you can tax it into oblivion and people won't be able to do it anymore. They won't be able to buy it anymore. This kind of thing. Let's tax cigarettes, or let's tax this, or let's tax that. But let's go ahead.
Tax gas vehicles. Let's tax natural gas burning appliances. They want a transformative government in Biden and Obama, and that's what they were. They use taxes as a weapon to change the way you think about things, to modify your actions. Yeah. To modify your thought process. That's the abuse that being able to tax income allows. We have to pivot away from that so that freedom can exist when it comes to choice and what you want to do as an individual in the United States. And you're absolutely right, Kyle, when they can levy a tax to change the way that you think and act and exist, they're exerting a power that they shouldn't be allowed to exert on you in a free country.
Exactly. You're exactly right. And that again is one of the reasons why, I think that especially when the bigwigs in Congress or the Nancy Pelosi's or the others, they really kind of look down, I think, and say, we're going to make them the way that we want to make them now. And they're going to have to follow, or it's going to be really tough.
The love of my life keeps telling me this every day when she gets a little bit too full of what's in the news cycle and shuts it off. We're living in capital city in the Hunger Games. These people think they know better. They're going to oppress you because you will live the way they want you to live. And you will do what you're allowed to do so that they can live the way they want to live. The only way to end that is to end that. Right. So if you want to equate what we're going through to the Hunger Games series, Washington, D.C. and the deep state is capital city. And in the end, for the people to be free, the deep state must be destroyed. And that means keeping this pressure on. and supporting the people who are actually spotlighting the corruption and the grift that has been happening. Not trying to go after them to marginalize them. The left will do everything they can to get you on board that bandwagon. Do not fall for it. It's time to persevere.
You're listening to Underground USA.
Wokeism is a threat to the very foundations of our great nation and to the very principles of liberty and justice. The goal of wokeism is to divide us, pitting Americans against one another based on race, gender, and identity. This ideology undermines free speech and open dialogue, which are the bedrock of our republic. It promotes censorship and cancels anyone who dares to challenge its extreme agenda. We must stand against this cultural Marxism and protect our constitutional rights. Say no to wokeism.
I wanted to touch on why it is so critically important to maintain the hunt for the ideological sleeper cells embedded in federal agencies and departments in pursuit of reform. Two recent stories validate my contention that every agency and department under the executive branch, including the lesser White House and executive office staff, must be rid of any previously appointed careerists and especially any holdovers from Democrat administrations. Anyone who received their positions during the Clinton, Obama, or Biden administrations must be released from service. The first example comes in the removal of Michelle King, who was serving as acting commissioner of the Social Security Administration right up until it was discovered that she was stonewalling a DOGE investigation into massive fraud within the agency. King had spent several decades at the agency before being named its acting commissioner last month. This comes as a report surfaced that $71.8 billion in improper Social Security payments were made between 2015 and 2022 alone. And the second example comes in the resignation of senior U.S. prosecutor Denise Chung, who quit after being ordered to issue grand jury subpoenas to determine whether a contract had been unlawfully awarded. Chung's refusal to execute a prosecutorial order from her superiors, who determined the need for the action, exists as a usurpation of acting D.C. U.S. Attorney Ed Martin's legitimate authority. The grand jury sought by Martin was to determine criminal culpability in the Biden administration's awarding of billions of dollars in environmental grants immediately before President Trump re-entered the White House. The deep state uniparty rot permeates the executive branch agencies and departments, requiring a massive culling of the herd to ensure that the shadow governments of the past don't simply run out the clock on the Trump administration while providing Operation Life Support to the elements of corruption that the American people mandated Mr. Trump to eliminate. Quite frankly, an exact replica of the DOGE effort currently underway in the executive branch must be executed in the legislative and judicial branches of our federal government if we are to fully exterminate the roach operative of the status quo deep state. The obstacle to that becoming a reality is the lack of will to do so. Finding a set of balls where reformative action is concerned on Capitol Hill or across the street at the U.S. Supreme Court, rhetorically speaking, of course, is like finding a drinking fountain on the face of the sun. And before I go, I wanted to address the cultural Stockholm syndrome emerging in people's almost pre-programmed criticism of Elon Musk and the job he's doing with DOGE. Recently, a few usually reasonable people have floated the propaganda that Elon Musk is executing his efforts with DOGE to benefit himself personally. A more ridiculous statement is seldom heard. A person who's manipulating his or her position to benefit themselves wouldn't stand silently next to the United States president while he bashed the very products and industry that you own and that brings you the wealth you've earned. This is the case with Musk. He stood silently as Trump brutally bashed the EV industry. Further, it's not self-beneficial when politically motivated prosecutorial misconduct in the form of investigations and tax probes are ceased in the name of lawfulness, which is also the case. The DOJ has terminated investigations started under the Biden administration and after Musk aligned with Trump because those investigations were both politically motivated and illegitimate. The fact of the matter is this. The long knives are out for Musk because he's exposing the corruption and graft perpetrated by the deep state uniparty, and they are going to do everything in their power to stop him, to destroy him. That's what's playing out here. Those attacking Elon Musk for exposing the sickening level of corruption in our federal government are suffering from a cultural Stockholm syndrome, fomented by years of corrupt politicians and the K Street-backed media telling you that's just how government works. No, it's not. And it doesn't need to be this way. That's what Musk is exposing. As the first step to recovering from this cultural Stockholm syndrome, ask yourself this question. How do elected officials making a six-figure salary, who have to pay exorbitant rent for living quarters in the nation's capital, exit office as multimillionaires, sometimes amassing wealth in the 8- and 9-figure range? Then, with an open mind, reconsider what Musk is exposing.
You're listening to Underground USA.
The foundation of our great nation lies in our unwavering commitment to freedom, and at its core is the principle of free speech. It's not just a right, but a duty to speak our minds, respectfully debate, and challenge ideas. Today, free speech is under attack by the forces of the deep state and the globalists. We must all do our part to protect free speech, for without it, we'd be lost in a sea of woke conformity and censorship. We have the right. Protect it.
If you like the podcast, please head on over to undergroundusa.com and sign up for our Substack. It brings our new podcasts and articles directly into your email box every time they're released. And do your part to save the Republic. Talk politics, current events, and religion with your family, friends, colleagues, and acquaintances. Do it respectfully and stay away from the argumentative tones. They usually don't achieve anything. When we have these productive conversations, we realize there's more that we agree on than we disagree on, that there's more of us than there are of them. And by them, I mean the uniparty operatives of the deep state, who do everything they can to divide us in order to balkanize us into demographics they can cobble together to win elections, to maintain power, to keep the grift going. We have to kill the deep state. You're listening to Underground USA. No fear, no political correctness, and no wokeism. My name is Frank Salvato.